Well, hello, Nativity Bible Heads. It is Dr. Wayne, and this is your Sunday morning Power Bible Study. We are now in the second Sunday after the Epiphany. The Epiphany day is always January 6th. It's one of those fixed day events in the liturgical calendar, much like Christmas is always December 25th, much unlike Easter, right? Which is depending on a whole lot of things, which we'll get into later. But the texts for Epiphany, last week we had the the baptism of Jesus, the first Sunday after the Epiphany. The Epiphany on January 6th is always the celebration of the coming of the wise men, the magi, to Jesus. And the word epiphany means manifestation. It refers to Jesus being revealed to the world. And the themes of our readings are always the initiative of God, the illumination of God, the way God is getting into the world. We start with our reading from 1 Samuel. Now, I happen to know, which I don't always know, that the sermon this week of Father Scott will be coming from 1 Samuel chapter 3, verses 1 through 10. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I do want to show how these texts tie together, because it's very illuminating with regard to our positions as Christians in the world, as ambassadors for our Christ and for God. Chapter 3 of 1 Samuel. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. Does this not fit the theme of the initiative of God, right? The idea that the word of the Lord was rare, visions were not widespread, which means to say that there wasn't a great expectation involved. A lot of times psychologists will explain experiences for, well, it has to do with what the heart wants or what our subconscious desires. And our narrator in 1 Samuel is clear to say, this is not the case here. The word of the Lord was rare, visions were not widespread. They really weren't looking for it. Verse 2. At that time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his room. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Okay, so where is all of this happening? There was a temple in Shiloh. Shiloh is not Jerusalem. Shiloh, remember, these are the times before David centralized the worship in Jerusalem. Shiloh was a town north of Jerusalem, and Hannah was Samuel's mother. She was barren, much like Mary and Elizabeth were barren. And much like Elizabeth was barren in her old age. We can't talk about Mary like that because obviously she was not in her old age when she became pregnant with the baby Jesus. But there are many similarities between the exclamation of joy of Samuel's mother when he was born that are similar to what we see as the Song of Mary in the Gospel of Luke. I think I mentioned this in a sermon not too long ago, that our gospel writers, especially Luke, oh my goodness, especially Luke, he knows the Old Testament and specifically the story of Samuel. Samuel represented a change in God doing something new. A time when, like it says, the word of the Lord was rare, visions were not widespread, which means there wasn't a whole lot of seeking after. Samuel had been dedicated by his mother Hannah to the Lord. And she, after his weaning, no longer suckling at the breast, was left to dedicated to God, and he actually lived with Eli, and he grew up ministering in the temple at Shiloh. Verse 4. 1 Samuel 3, verse 4. Then the Lord called, Samuel, Samuel. And he said, Here I am, and ran to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. But he said, I did not call. Lie down again. So he went down and lay down. So he went and lay down. The Lord again called Samuel. Samuel. The Lord called again. Samuel. Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. So this is the second time, right? But he said, I did not call you, my son. Lie down again. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. This is to say that Samuel, in his upbringing at the temple, his duties were not particularly religious or spiritual. They were more along the lines of, he probably just kept things clean. He was probably just doing grunt work. So he hadn't really had much spiritual experience in recognizing, being, and responding to the Lord, talking with the Lord. No sense of that at all. That's what we're being told when our narrator says in verse 7, now Samuel did not yet know the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. Verse 8. The Lord called Samuel again, a third time. Anytime in stories something happens a third time, it means it's okay. By the time the third time it happens, something's going to change. And it does. And he got up and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Eli, remember, he was falling down on his job. He basically had not been doing what he was supposed to be doing as a priest. And it took this call of Samuel for him to wake up and say, oh, it's kind of like the cynical, you can imagine him like a cynical old priest. So like, oh, wow, God still does that? And so he tells Samuel, oh, wow. Son of a gun. Well, could be God. Could be God. And it's almost as though Eli's saying, I haven't heard from God in a long time. And if you have, then you go for it, boy. This is the way that was. Verse 9. Therefore, Eli said to Samuel, Go, lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Verse 10, and this is where we stop and move on. Now the Lord came and stood there, calling as before, Samuel. Notice the difference. The Lord stood there. We never heard before about the Lord standing anywhere. All we heard was the voice. The Lord called. Here, the Lord stood there. Very anthropomorphic imagery. What is anthropomorphic imagery? Anthropomorphic imagery is when we use human characteristics to describe divinity or God. Only a human could stand. The Lord can't stand. But this is anthropomorphic. Now the Lord came and stood there, calling as before, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, Speak, for your servant is listening. So the emphasis, remember, of our second Sunday of Epiphany is the initiative of God. So continuing on to Psalm 139, in our text for today, we only have verses 1 through 5 and 12 to 17. I'll probably just do all of 1 through 18. But there are many indications that maybe the last part of the psalm is actually a separate psalm, but we don't have it all in our lection for today. So what I'll do is I'll just do the portion that is relevant to or included in our lection in our daily in our weekly lection for church. Okay, so Psalm 139. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from far away. Anytime you see a description of two extremes, notice where it says, you know me when I sit down and when I rise up. Notice those are two extremes of a continuum. It automatically implies that God is there everywhere in between as well. Okay, that's called a merism, M-E-R-I-S-M. Verse 3, you search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in behind and before and lay your hand upon me. Remember, the themes of Epiphany are God's initiation, God's manifestation, God's illumination. So this is the reason why this psalm is included is because it tells of the psalmist's being present to the presence of God, okay? Inviting us to see that God's presence is also with us all the time, regardless of how we may feel. That's the way that is. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is so high that I cannot attain to it. By the way, verses 6 to 11, I don't think are actually in our lection for today, but I'm going to read them anyway. Verse 7, where can I go from your spirit, or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. Of course, Sheol is the abode of the dead, heaven, the abode of God. So another merism, it includes everything in between. Verse 9, if I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. God's presence, God's manifestation, God's initiation. Yeah. Verse 11, if I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light around me become night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you. This is a recognition, of course, that for God, there's no difference in light and dark because God is all-encompassing. Verse 13. For it was you who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. Notice how the psalmist is shifting from this global cosmic awareness of God's presence, God's manifestation, and it focuses way down into, before he even was born. Verse 14, I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, that I know you very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes beheld my unformed substance. In your book were written all the days that were formed for me, when none of them as yet existed. How weighty to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. I try to count them. They are more than the sand. I come to the end. I am still with you. So I hope that this becomes obvious, a very poetic understanding. This psalm is used to glorify the fact that our bodies, there's no mistake here, having a body is a gift. Having a body is the way God gets us into the world. Now, why am I mentioning all this? Because when we look to the epistle, which I'm moving to now, the epistle lesson in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, we have a much different, Paul is dealing with people who are saying, you know what, it doesn't really matter what we do with our bodies. Notice in the psalm, it's like, oh, the psalm is the temple. The psalm is, or the body is the temple. Well, actually, Paul is going to say that, but the idea of, oh, the body is fearfully and wonderfully made, that we're knit together, like the fact that we have a body, it's not a mistake, it's intentional, and it's good. That's the thing. There is an affirmation of creation in all of that. Now, when Paul was ministering into the Greek world, there were many who were of the mindset that the body was evil, the body was inherently bad, and that the body could not contain any kind of divinity whatsoever because it was base and it was horrible. So therefore, and there was even a belief that had arisen that, you know what? Jesus couldn't have actually been human. He looked human, but he couldn't have actually been human because having flesh and bones and blood, it's all bad. And Paul has to counteract this. Okay, 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 12 to 20. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are beneficial. Okay, so Paul is quoting them where he says all things are lawful for him. That's something they were saying. It says, oh, he's saying, you say all things are lawful for me, but I say, but not all things are beneficial. Continuing in verse 12, you say all things are lawful for me, but I say I will not be dominated by anything. Okay, do you get that? So Paul is emphasizing the fact that our personhood is determined by who we are in God now, and that we're not going to use our freedom as something that's going to imprison us. This is the way they had been going. This is the direction they had been going. Verse 13, food is meant for the stomach and stomach for food. This is another quote. You say food is meant for the stomach and stomach. And Paul says, yeah, and God's going to destroy both of them, both one and the other. The body is meant not for fornication. This is Paul putting his words. He's not quoting here. Verse in the middle of verse 13. The body is meant not for fornication, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. Notice the glorification of and respect for the body. And God raised the Lord and will also raise us by his power, referring to the resurrection. The resurrection for Paul represented how God treats our bodies. Like our bodies don't just, our bodies, the idea is that the resurrection is not just a spiritual resurrection. The idea is that we have a spiritual body. This is the way that Scripture has described it. It's not like we're a ghost. There is actually a resurrected body, a glorified body. Why? Because Paul wants us to appreciate the fact that the bodies that we have are going to be transformed into another kind of body, and not just a ghost, but some kind of it. This is the mystery of our faith. Verse 15, do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Should I therefore take the members of Christ and make them members of a prostitute? Never. Paul is talking about the disregard for one's body in the sexual way, whereby it's disregarded as like, it's just the body. What does it matter? Paul is saying that there's something sacred about the body, therefore it does matter. Let us continue. Verse 16. Do you not know that whoever is united to a prostitute becomes one body with her? For it is said, the two shall be one flesh. There he's quoting Genesis, right? But anyone united to the Lord becomes one spirit with him. So notice the glorification, the respect Paul is saying that we should have in our bodies. And with regard to sex, well, look, Verse 18, shun fornication. Every sin that a person commits is outside the body, but the fornicator sins against the body itself. It's as though we're not respecting the body, Paul says. Sex is supposed to be something that does respect the body. And any sex that does not respect the body is against the plan of God. Verse 19, or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, which you have from God, and that you are not your own? See, Paul wants us to have so much respect for our body that we see that our interactions, our sexual interactions as well, that it's honoring, that it's something that glorifies God, that it's something that lifts up all of humanity, that it ties us together, not something that tears us apart. Verse 20, for you were bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body. So one of the things that would happen back in those days is when a slave was freed, they were often money from the temple treasury was used for it, which meant that, money from the temple treasury was what got you your freedom, then therefore you owe yourself to God. That's the idea that he's getting at here. Paul is not denigrating sex. I don't even think he's denigrating sex, premarital sex. I think what he is saying is that when bodies do this, it's got to be something that's honoring. It's got to be something that's, yes, consensual. And yes, it is something that is not used to dominate. It's used as something for each other's pleasure, which is inherent in the glorification of God when that is the case, not when people are demeaned or put down. Very good. How does that fit into our theme of Epiphany? Well, think about it. In Epiphany, we're talking about the initiation of God, the illumination of God, and God being manifest in the world. And so that passage in Paul's letter to the Corinthians is supposed to get us to understand that, God is manifested in me when I am participating even in those sexual acts. And even in the eating, because he mentioned the food as well. God is manifested in that. God is manifested in my body. So whereas the Epiphany season talks about God showing God's self to the world, one of the ways God does that is through us. All right, and our bodies. Last of our four passages today is from the Gospel of John, and it's a very fun little passage. It starts in verse 43 and it goes to verse 51. John 1, 43 to 51. The next day, by the way, Jesus had just gotten done calling his disciples here. And so one of them, Philip, is, this is an interaction with one of the disciples he had just called. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, follow me. Oh, yeah, okay. So I think I may have misspoke there, and that Philip, this is just the calling of Philip as well. And Philip continues the process. Verse 44. Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. That's who had been previously called Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, we have found him about whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth. Nathanael said to him, can anything good come out of Nazareth? Philip said to him, come and see. When Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him, he said of him, this is Jesus saying of Nathanael, here is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. Okay, this is a packed statement. First of all, let's back up. When Philip says to Nathanael, come and see, that's where it touches on the theme of the Epiphany, the manifestation, the showing, God's initiation, God's illumination, God's instruction. We bring other people, our inviting of other people by our words and our ways bring more people to Jesus. Jesus is manifested more and shown more to the world when we introduce people to Jesus through our words and our ways. Our words and our ways. Very good. Now, in this last, when Jesus saw him, he said, here is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. Now, okay, why do we have this line? Well, it's going to bookend on the other end of the passage, but one of the things we have to remember about Israel's history, especially with regard to the patriarchs, Jacob was quite the little deceiver. There was a lot of deceit that went on in the life of Israel, and Jacob was one of those guys. Why do I mention Jacob? Because we're going to have a reference to Jacob later. Jesus is bringing up the fact that God has a long history of dealing with the Israelites, in their deceit and in their being tricksters and such, and which is one of those things that that didn't stop God from choosing the Israelites, but here Jesus is bringing this theme into play so that he can say something later. Stay tuned. Verse 48, Nathanael asked him, where did you get to know me? Jesus answered, well, I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you. Nathan replied. This obviously reflects that Jesus had an insight into Nathanael upon seeing him. Some people call it what? Intuition, or you get a feeling for something. Maybe that's what he's referring to. Verse 49, Nathanael replied, Rabbi, and that means literally, my teacher, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. He is having an epiphany. He is having that's the way we use the word epiphany, right? It's like, oh, wow, ooh, an awakening, right? Oh, that you are God. It's like in that moment, he got who Jesus was. Jesus answered, verse 50, Jesus answered, do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than these. So he's stating basically that, Nathanael, if you're impressed by the fact that I just remembered seeing you previously, you're much thinking way too small. Verse 51, and he said to him, this is Jesus talking to Nathanael, very truly I tell you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. Oh, you remember that dream that Jacob had? Remember Jacob laying his head on a rock, and he has this dream, and has the heavens are open, and what's happening? There's a big ladder or a staircase, and there's angels ascending and descending, and on Jacob himself. And Jesus is saying that he is Jacob in this respect. So that thing about truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit is the entrance point to this reference to Jacob. Remember, one of the things that Jesus was the singular person who represented the whole. There was a corporate identity in Jesus. Jesus was the entire nation of Israel. Remember, Jacob got renamed Israel. Remember, he had the 12 tribes. Everybody who was an Israelite was a descendant from him. This is the way, this is the structure that we're looking at. And Jesus is saying, oh, who I am, so in this theme of Epiphany, who I am is everybody. There you have it. The corporate identity of Jesus. This is the reason why when he does go to the cross, that his death and his resurrection means something much bigger than what it just might look like to the average observer. This reason why there was much more meaning in it is because he represented the whole of Israel, the whole sonship of Israel in the singular Son of God. This is what our Epiphany theme emphasizes, is how Jesus takes this on and it manifests that to the world. That's the reason why we who now call ourselves Christians in the church, we are a part of the identity of God in the world, and we are a part of that manifestation of God to the world. So go with that, and blessings on you as you seek to live as God's epiphany to the world.